Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai, and today we're going to be pruning and shaping my Japanese larch forest. Alright, so this is the forest planting that we're going to be working on here today. It's just a group of Japanese larch together in an oval plastic training pot. Before we start pruning and shaping, I would just like to start by explaining a little bit about how this forest planting was put together. So back about 2 years ago, I ended up ordering 30 Japanese larch from a garden centre, and they arrived in a big bundle bare root for me to work with, and I ended up selecting the best trees that I thought would look good in a forest planting, and I assembled the planting back on the 1st of June 2021. I just arranged them in the pot how I thought would look nice and wired them in, and then fast forward to the 16th of July 2021, I wired some of the branches on the tree, wired them down, the buds were then beginning to open, started to look really good, and then fast forward to the 15th of August 2021, and the tree then pushed out a lot of growth. It had a good amount of healthy foliage. Then by the 15th of September 2021, the tree started looking kind of out of control, really growing wild, so I gave it a prune back to promote lots of dense growth. Then coming around to the end of the year, December 29th, you could see the tree was starting to go yellow, brown, the leaves were going to start dropping off. Then on the following year, on the 24th of February 2022, it snowed. I got some pictures of the tree that were covered in snow. I thought it looked really beautiful. And then fast forward again to this year, it snowed a few weeks back. I got a little picture on my phone of the larch covered in snow for another year. So we're going to do some work on this tree today. I'm just going to be doing a little bit of pruning, maybe some wiring on the forest, just to improve the overall shape, balanced vigor in the tree, so that whenever it begins pushing out a lot of growth now in spring, the tree will be growing in the right directions. And as I go, I'm just going to explain my thought process and why I'm doing certain things that I'm doing. The tools that I will be using in this video today are some wire cutters, twig cutters, a nylon brush, or you could use a toothbrush, some bonsai tweezers, and some branch cutters. I'm just going to start here by going along and pulling out any weeds with the tweezers. Got a little plant pot here I can put them into, just so that I don't make a mess. I'm also going to take off these stones that I put on. I could re-landscape this at the end, just taking them off for now. You see, if the weeds end up growing large and out of control on your bonsai trees, the roots of the weeds can start to get tangled and intertwined with your tree, and in some cases, it's pretty rare, but it can happen. The weed can either diminish the health of your tree or kill it entirely. So it's good to stay on top of them when they're small like this. And now that I have most of the weeds removed, I'm just going to take a paintbrush, and all I want to do is just brush the top layer off. And this is just to get rid of the old needles from last year. There's no harm in having the old needles there. I'm sure they'll decompose, bring nutrients back into the soil, but I'm just going to give it a little clean up. That is how much I have removed from the top layer of soil. And you don't have to necessarily throw this away. You can keep it, compost it, and reuse it again on one of your trees. And now, just as another bit of maintenance, I'm going to come in with this nylon brush and just brush the bottom of all of the trees to get rid of any moss that may be growing up the trunk. And as you know, moss on the trunks of trees will provide too much moisture in this area. You won't get that nice old bark in areas where there's moisture, and you may actually get roots in certain areas that have too much moisture also, and I don't want that. So I'm just cleaning up the base of all of the trunks. You can actually see there's some whiteness on this trunk here, where I painted lime sulfur last year as an experiment to see if I could make the tree look a little bit older. And I think it looks quite nice. I'm going to begin to now work on the branches and structure of the forest. Now, first off, unlike a regular bonsai, in a forest, I don't want each of the trees to have a wide triangular shape. I still want them to have a triangular shape, but maybe a very pointy triangle like this coming up this way. I'm also going to remove any branches that are growing straight up. So this one here immediately can go. It's a little bit too long here, so I'm going to just shorten it back to a bud. Then I just prune the end off this one. Up here I can see it's getting a little bit congested, so I'm going to shorten this branch back to here. I feel that this branch here is getting a little bit too thick, so if I shorten it back and have this as the new leader of this branch, I'm going to shorten this to here. There's also a little branch under here that I feel in time will create inverse taper, so I'm going to remove. This one's growing straight up. I like how this branch comes out here, splits, and we've got one on each side. So I'm going to just shorten this back here and maybe here. Got a little bit of movement. There's one growing here from the elbow, which if I leave this here any longer, the trunk will swell in that area and it won't look very nice. So I'm just going to cut that right back off. That prevents that from happening. Just make sure that cut's nice and clean. Here, this is quite a thick branch on this. I could remove that entirely maybe, or I could cut this down to here and have this as the new leader of this tree, but I don't like how it grows inward towards all of my other trees. So for this year maybe I will just shorten it, and I'll make a big decision possibly next year. Just going to shorten all of the branches on it to the first bud. And the apex here, I would like to shorten this quite dramatically, because on larches and the Japanese larch, they tend to grow quite vigorously on the apex, and the weak growth tends to be on the bottom of the trees. So I would like to do more heavy pruning on the top of all of the larches today to balance the vigor down to the bottom of the tree again. So here I think I'm going to just cut this there, because there's two buds here and here. This one that's growing towards the inside of the planting, I'm going to shorten to the lowest bud. And I'm also thinking about directional pruning as I prune this tree, pruning to a bud where it will grow a branch in the direction I want it to grow. I'm going to cut this one down to here. Back onto this really thick branch again. I think I'm going to remove all of this here, and now I have this as a little short branch. There's a good lot of taper on that, so I might end up keeping this if I think it looks nice whenever it grows out. There's a little stub here that I can remove. And again, I'm going to just shorten that. So I think that's all I'm going to do on this little tree. Possibly shorten these two, just to make everything nice and compact. This branch here is growing underneath, so I don't really want a branch growing downwards, so I can get rid of that. You know, on second thoughts, I was going to wire this branch out like this, but I don't think I will. I think it looks more natural to just let the tree do its thing. Maybe if this grows next year, I can cut it here. I'll leave it as is just to see how it develops. And if I don't like it, I can always come in next year and clean it up. Whilst pruning for good branching on trees, always consider the overall look of the entire planting also. So as I prune these trees, I'm also taking a step back to look to make sure everything looks good. So now I'm going to work on this tree, which is at the edge of the planting. And again, this branch is going straight up. I can remove that. So now it flows outward, and just before it comes a little bit too far, I'm going to cut it back there. That will promote nice compact growth. This is growing straight down, so I could remove that. Moving up to this branch here, it's got like 3 coming from the one spot. Now this one's growing up, which I think I can remove because I don't want the branches to look like they're springing up. I want them to grow nice and straight out from the trunk. So I'm going to come in with the branch cutters, cut that off. Now we've got a split here, and I think I'm going to cut this back to maybe the first set of buds, like that, just to see how that goes. So these will open, and it'll be nice and really compact growth. This branch is growing right in at the elbow here, so I'm going to remove that. In general, anything growing at an elbow, I don't want there. I'm going to cut this back here so that it splits off there. I think this branch is a little bit too thick. So now it flows into this one. And also here, I'm going to remove this one growing underneath because I don't want any branches growing straight downward. This branch here is in quite a nice spot, but I don't like how it's the same thickness the whole way out. I could cut back to this little green bud that's emerging there, but I feel like it would be really strange coming from this protrusion on the trunk already. So I think I'm going to cut it back to that bud. But I'm also going to wire this particular branch because it's springing up ever so slightly where I'd like it to be more there. I'm going to measure a little length of 1.5 millimeter wire, and I'm going to anchor this piece of wire to this branch here. And I don't want to wire it in such a way that it looks too unnatural and man-made. I would like to wire this so that it's just very, very subtle. I'm being very careful not to damage the fragile buds with the wire. And now it's good to keep in mind when wiring larches, not to wire them before the buds have begun to open. Larches just don't like that. And as these buds now are just beginning to turn green and swell, now is the perfect time to wire and prune. For me, what feels like too much adjustment is if I push this down like this, and the moment you see a bend like this that looks a little bit forced, then that would be too much for it to look natural, I think. Maybe you could wire it to that point, but never there, because it just looks like a human has forced that branch down. Now this next branch is pretty interesting because I cut it here last year in the hopes that a little bud on the side of here would develop into a branch, and it sure did. So I'm going to have this as the new leader of that branch, and you can see here this was growing at an elbow, and it's beginning to just start with a little bit of inverse taper that I don't want. So I'm just going to come in with the branch cutters and remove this. And I think I'm going to wire this branch just ever so slightly in this direction outward. And now to the apex of this one. Again, larches love to put all their energy into the top of the tree, so it's okay to prune a little bit harder on the top. And for that reason, I'm going to remove this big branch and allow this little one to be the leader. Just going to cut here. And now I'm going to work on one more tree and explain my thought process again, just as a repetition so you get the idea of what I'm doing as I prune all the branches. I'm going to work from the bottom up again. Let's start with this little lowest one here. This looks a little bit weak, like it's just going to break off. I'm just going to prune that here. Have that as the branch. I feel like this is short enough, so I'm not going to do anything to that one. Moving up to this branch, it's got quite a lot going on up here. I could actually cut off this branch entirely so it tapers really, really close in here, or I could let this develop. I think I'm going to remove the bottom one just because this one's a lot further ahead. Don't want that. Moving up here, I can see there's a little bit I can remove there. I'm going to cut back to these buds here. The larches really love to send out back buds under the branches. With this branch, I think I'm going to cut back to just this first branch on it and have a taper from there. And I find larches to be very forgiving trees. Really good species for beginners. If you're wondering how often to repot a larch, with younger trees I would advise repotting every 2 years. These are quite young as they are, so perhaps I'll repot this next year or the year after as I repotted last year. And with older larch, you could maybe repot them every 3 to 4 years. It all depends on the speed in which the tree grows, but you will notice in general with older larches, they do slow down a little in their root growth. And now here's a scenario that's really good to keep in mind. Trees are sort of crossing over with each other. This tree is interfering with this tree, which isn't always a bad thing, but I would like each of the trees to look like they have their own space to grow. So for that reason, I'm going to cut this one back here and this one on this tree back here, so there's just a nice space between them branches. Now just so that this video isn't too long, I'm just going to go and continue to prune the rest of the trees, following the same guidelines that I had from before, where I remove growth that's growing maybe at the crotch of the branches, shortening the growth that's possibly too long, and of course removing the vigor from the apexes. So now I would like to address another problem here. I'm just going to put this green piece of plastic between these trees to make this tree a lot easier to see. And now looking at the apex of this tree, I feel like this branch would make a much better leader for the tree than this one up here. And for that reason, I'm going to cut this tree just down to here. And now after more consideration, I think I'm going to have this as the leader and remove this one entirely. So I cut this at an angle here. I'm pretty happy with that. And then just so that this doesn't lose so much moisture from being cut here, I'm going to cover it in some cut putty. This little piece of cut putty will also prevent fungal infections and bacteria getting into that wound. And it's just as important to keep moisture out of the tree than it is to let moisture escape. And I think that will do the trick. So I think I'm going to do something really, really drastic. I've deemed this the front, so I feel as though that these trees at the back here are a little bit too tall for the planting. In general, I would like the frontmost tree to be the tallest, but they're a little bit too tall and wobbly. They don't look powerful and strong like big trees in a forest. To me, they still look like whips. I reduced the height on the tree back here a little bit just to see how it would affect the composition. And I'm quite happy with this tree in the background being lower. So I also think by reducing the height of this one, it would benefit the composition even more. So I'm going to reduce this just a little bit at a time because what you take off, you can't put back on. All right, how does that look? Every cut I do, I come around to the front and look at the whole composition. Yeah, I think that could come down a little bit more. Take that down to this branch. It still looks like it's too tall in comparison with the front one. So I think I could even take it down to here. Yeah, I like the height of that. I think these two trees look too similar. I want to try and create some uniqueness between each of the trees. So each tree has its own character in a way. So I'm just going to make this tree a little bit smaller than that one. Yeah, that looks great. And I think on that, the pruning and shaping is complete. I'm not going to do any landscaping on the base today. I'm just going to put the little stones I took off back on, and then we'll come back a different day and maybe do a whole redesign of the landscape. Over the next few weeks, as it really comes into spring, I'm going to be using a high nitrogen fertilizer on this planting just to encourage lots of growth after giving it a prune. And on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot and the YouTube algorithm. This forest was inspired by Nigel Saunders' larch forest. I just seen it and thought, oh my god, that is so beautiful. So hopefully in years to come, if it even looks half as good as Nigel's, I'll be happy. Please let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. What did you think of my pruning decisions? Is there anything you would do differently? I'm always open to new ideas. If you would like to stay up to date with the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's at Notion Bonsai, and you'll be able to check out all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.